You've probably answered the question, where are you from? 100 times. Your city, your country, your culture. But the real answer? It's far more ancient, more mysterious, and more epic than you've ever imagined. Your story began long before borders existed, when your ancestors walked beside mammoths, survived volcanic winters, and crossed entire continents on foot. Some of them weren't even fully human. They fought, adapted, migrated, not just to survive, but to become you. This isn't just a history lesson. This is a time machine into your bloodline, a journey through forgotten empires, lost forests, and the shadows of evolution itself. So before you say, "I know where I'm from," ask yourself, how far back are you really willing to go? You think you know where you're from. A country, a city, maybe a flag. But what if I told you your story began long before maps, nations, or even language? Before kings, before pyramids. Your bloodline crossed glaciers, outran extinction, and survived 1,000 apocalypses. This isn't just history. It's your story, buried in time, waiting to be uncovered. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Origin. We grow up believing we know where we're from. A city on a map, a nation defined by lines on paper, maybe a flag, a language, or a family surname passed down like an heirloom. It's a comforting illusion, a sense of identity rooted in a few generations of memory. Your parents were likely born in the same region as you, maybe even the same hospital. Their lives shaped by familiar streets, familiar festivals, local food, and common dreams. Their parents, your grandparents, may have come from rural towns or neighboring cities, migrating not across continents, but across counties, in search of work or education, carrying with them old traditions, songs, and dialects that still echo in your childhood. It all feels neat, like your story began just a few steps before you. But this sense of closeness is a mirage. Travel back just one more generation, and the narrative begins to fracture. You find names you've never heard, documents in foreign languages, photographs in sepia tones where the eyes look like yours. But the world around them is unrecognizable. A great-grandmother born in a market town in Eastern Europe. A great-grandfather who crossed the Atlantic with nothing but a trunk and a name, chasing a life he couldn't yet imagine. And if you dare to keep going, the path dissolves into shadow, into wars, migrations, collapsed empires, and forgotten villages. Your bloodline weaves through the heart of the Ottoman Empire, the fall of the Austro-Hungarian crown, the plagues that emptied medieval towns, and the ancient trade routes that carried both silk and stories. It continues further, into the mists of prehistory, when your ancestors roamed the Eurasian steppe on foot, living in skin tents, hunting reindeer with stone tools, and watching the northern lights dance above frozen rivers. Their children would eventually settle in forests and valleys, mixing with others who had taken entirely different paths through the maze of survival. Some fled the Mongol invasions, others were born from the ashes of conquest. And behind them all, a deeper, older line, one that predates agriculture, writing, and memory itself. These were the original wanderers, the first anatomically modern humans, walking out of Africa some 70,000 years ago, not as conquerors, but as survivors, fragile, intelligent, and endlessly curious. They left footprints on beaches that are still visible today, but even they weren't the beginning. Your story stretches into a time when human was not yet defined, when strange, upright creatures like Homo erectus lit the first campfires and tamed the night. Before them came Australopithecus, still half climbers, half walkers, navigating a world of predators with clever hands and sharper instincts. And further still, in the branches of ancient trees, you find the primates from whom we all descend. Creatures that looked nothing like us, but carried the seeds of everything we would become. So when you say you're from a place, a city, a nation, a culture, you're not wrong, but you're also not entirely right. Because where you're really from isn't a dot on the map. It's the entire map. It's every path your ancestors walked, every fire they built, every migration they survived. You are the product of millions of moments, some recorded, most forgotten, that stretch back not centuries, but epochs. You are not just someone with a past. You are the living continuation of the human story. Chapter 2. Ghosts Beneath the Map. We've been taught to see the world through the clean lines of modern maps, bold borders, named countries, familiar flags. But peel back the centuries, and those lines dissolve into dust, revealing a land that never stood still. The truth is, your ancestors didn't live within borders. They walked across them long before they were drawn. 10,000 years ago, there were no countries, no capitals, no citizenships, only vast stretches of wilderness and the restless feet of people searching for food, safety, and meaning. The people you come from were not bound by nations, but by necessity. Some crossed mountain ranges chasing herds. Others followed rivers downstream until the water turned to sea. They moved when the earth froze, and again when it thawed. They traveled through open savannas, dense rainforests, and deserts that would one day become battlefields. Your story, whether you trace it to Europe, Asia, Africa, or the Americas, is built on movement. A series of migrations written into your DNA like a long-forgotten song. Around 70,000 years ago, a small band of Homo sapiens, possibly no more than a few hundred, left Africa, hugging coastlines as they spread across the world. Some settled in the Arabian Peninsula, others drifted east, toward India, Southeast Asia, and eventually Australia. One group veered north into Europe, where they encountered Neanderthals, not just as rivals, but as relatives. The evidence lies in your own genome. Small fragments of their DNA still linger in your cells, proof of ancient intermingling. Meanwhile, others journeyed across Central Asia, over millennia, into Siberia, and eventually across a now sunken land bridge into the Americas. These weren't armies or explorers. They were families, children, elders, people with stories and fears, much like your own. Their migration was slow, often aimless, sometimes forced, shaped by climate shifts, natural disasters, the rise and fall of ice ages, and the slow encroachment of desert or flood. By 10,000 BCE, when farming villages were forming in the Fertile Crescent, your ancestors were already scattered across nearly every inhabitable continent. Some began to settle, planting the first crops in what is now Iraq or Syria. Others remained mobile, nomads of the steppes, shepherding animals across endless grasslands. None of them could have imagined borders, much less imagined that one day their descendants would define themselves by them. Because what the map never shows you is this, that behind every boundary lies a deeper story of movement, conflict, survival, and mingling. That every modern population is built on layer after layer of migration, not purity, but mixture. Your bloodline, no matter how local it may seem, is a river fed by countless unseen tributaries. Hunters from Siberia, herders from Anatolia, traders from Mesopotamia, farmers from the Nile, warriors from the Caucasus, refugees from collapsed civilizations, So when you say you're from one place, you're naming only the most recent chapter in a story that's been unfolding for tens of thousands of years. Your true homeland isn't a single country. It's the earth itself, crossed, recrossed, and shared by the ghosts of your ancestors, long before the world was divided by ink. Chapter 3. Before we were human. We often think of human history as beginning with cities, kings, or fire. But the truth is, our story started long before the word human ever existed. To truly understand where you come from, you must journey back, not hundreds or thousands, but millions of years, to a time when your ancestors weren't even Homo sapiens. They were something else entirely. Bipedal, tool-using, forest-dwelling primates that stood at the edge of a great transition. Around 7 million years ago, somewhere in what is now Central Africa, the first cracks in our evolutionary branch appeared. A species like Sahelanthropus tchadensis, with both ape-like and human-like traits, roamed ancient woodlands, possibly walking upright, bridging two worlds, one in the trees, the other on the ground. A few million years later, creatures like Australopithecus afarensis, including the famous fossil Lucy, began to stride more confidently on two legs, freeing their hands not for holding power, but for holding tools. These early hominins couldn't speak, but they understood. They had families. They may have mourned their dead. And they survived in a world teeming with predators, droughts, and change. From them came Homo habilis, the handyman, one of the first of our genus to use stone tools, sharp flakes chipped from river rocks to cut meat and crack bone. Then Homo erectus emerged, taller, smarter, with a brain almost twice the size of Lucy's and legs built for endurance. They harnessed fire, migrated out of Africa nearly 2 million years ago, and spread across Asia and Europe, lighting the first sparks of global human expansion. These weren't just animals, they were pioneers, the ancestors of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and eventually, us. Your lineage passed through these beings, not metaphorically, but literally. Their DNA, their trials, their triumphs, are encoded in your cells. You carry the remnants of long-extinct cousins who built shelters from mammoth bones, who scraped symbols onto cave walls, who watched the stars long before they had names for them. And yet, none of them were called human at the time. That word is ours, a modern invention, applied retroactively to beings who never needed it. They lived, struggled, learned, and adapted not for glory or memory, but for life. So when you think of your origins, don't start with cities or kings. Don't even start with Homo sapiens. Start with the long silence of the savannah, the flicker of fire in a darkening forest, the glint of a stone tool held by a creature who didn't yet know what a future was, only that it had to keep going. Because without them, there is no you. And before you were human, you were everything that came before. Chapter 4. The Long Walk of Us. Roughly 300,000 years ago, in a scrubby woodland somewhere in East Africa, a species was born that would change the fate of the Earth, not through strength, size, or speed, but through adaptability, cooperation, and imagination. That species was Homo sapiens, anatomically modern humans, and yes, they were your direct ancestors. At first, they were just one among many human species alive at the time. Neanderthals lived across Europe, Denisovans in parts of Asia, Homo erectus still lingered in Indonesia, and other mysterious hominins, like Homo naledi and Homo floresiensis, clung to existence in their isolated corners of the world. Our ancestors were not alone. They emerged into a crowded family tree. but they were different. They crafted finer tools, painted stories on cave walls, and shaped objects with symbolic meaning. They buried their dead with care, and may have sung songs no one remembers. And while the world shifted under the weight of climate changes and extinction events, Homo sapiens began to move, slowly at first, generation by generation, unaware they were undertaking a journey that would reshape the planet. Somewhere between 70,000 and 60,000 years ago, a small group left Africa. Some estimates suggest as few as 1,000 people were in this early wave, yet their descendants would go on to populate the entire world. These early migrants traveled along the coastlines of the Arabian Peninsula, following the rhythm of tides and food. Some turned east, crossing the Indian subcontinent. Others pushed north through the Levant, into the vast, uncharted lands of Eurasia. Their movements weren't planned, but reactive, driven by droughts, resource scarcity, and an ever-curious instinct to explore. They walked on foot, barefoot or in crude sandals, navigating unfamiliar landscapes and encountering new species, some deadly, some edible. And wherever they went, they adapted. In colder climates, they tanned hides and built fires. In the tropics, they learned to fish, forage, and farm. They didn't just survive the world, they reshaped it to fit their needs. As they spread, they met other human species. In Europe, they encountered Neanderthals, and instead of replacing them outright, they interbred, something we know today through genetic evidence that lives on in most non-African people. In Asia, they met the Denisovans and did the same. These were not isolated incidents, but recurring encounters over thousands of years. The story of humanity isn't one of pure lines or isolated tribes. It is a braided rope of connections, intermingling, and shared ancestry. Meanwhile, others kept walking, across Siberia, down into Southeast Asia, and eventually across a now submerged land bridge into the Americas, likely around 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, though some evidence hints at even earlier arrivals. These ancient people were the first to see bison thunder across the plains of North America, the first to enter the untouched forests of the Amazon, the first to climb the jagged peaks of the Andes. In Australia, other early humans arrived by boat more than 40,000 years ago, navigating open sea using the stars, long before Europeans even knew such lands existed. And while the world filled with these scattered groups, each one began to form their own languages, rituals, art, and identities. Isolation, environment, and time shaped them. Over millennia, humans in northern regions developed lighter skin to absorb more vitamin D from the weaker sun, while those in equatorial zones retained darker skin for protection against UV radiation. Hair texture, eye shape, nose width, all evolved in response to climate, not color-coded races. Culture evolved even faster. The invention of agriculture around 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, and parts of Africa triggered a population boom. Villages became towns. Towns became cities. Writing systems appeared. Temples rose. Kingdoms formed. Religions spread. Humans started shaping the earth, carving terraces into mountains, building pyramids, draining swamps, damming rivers. But underneath all this change, the DNA stayed the same. We are still 99.9% genetically identical to each other. Every nation, every language, every religion, all emerged within a sliver of time. Not even a blink compared to the vast, slow burn of evolutionary history. And yet we cling to these recent labels as if they define us. The truth is, your lineage has crossed oceans, climbed mountains, survived ice ages, and endured plagues and wars. Your ancestors have stood at the edge of extinction more than once. They have walked from East Africa to the edges of Patagonia, from the Siberian tundra to Polynesian islands. You carry the genetic echo of people who saw woolly mammoths, saber-toothed cats, and forests where cities now stand. Their fingerprints are in your bones, your blood, your instincts. And the greatest illusion of all is that they are gone. They're not. They live through you. Every heartbeat is the continuation of a journey that began 300,000 years ago and never stopped walking. Chapter 5. The Lost One. The forgotten humans who shaped us and vanished. They are not in your family album. You've never heard their names spoken at the dinner table. And yet, without them, you would not be here. These are the lost humans, ancient cousins and evolutionary siblings who once walked the same earth as us, hunted the same prey, felt the same cold, and stared up at the same stars. But their names live mostly in the mouths of scientists. Homo naledi, Homo floresiensis, Homo luzonensis, the Denisovans, and even others we still haven't identified, only glimpsed in fragments of DNA and fossilized teeth. For much of the 20th century, we believed human evolution was a straight path, a march from primitive apes to modern humans. But the fossil record tells a different story. A tangled forest of branches, most of which ended in extinction, and that includes entire species of humans. In the caves of South Africa, archaeologists uncovered the remains of Homo naledi, a small-brained hominin who lived surprisingly recently, around 250,000 years ago, overlapping in time with early Homo sapiens. Though their brains were 1/3 the size of ours, they appear to have buried their dead deep within complex cave systems. In Indonesia, scientists found Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit for their small stature, who stood just over 3 feet tall and may have used stone tools to hunt animals far larger than themselves. They lived on the island of Flores until as recently as 50,000 years ago, a time when modern humans were already on the move. On Luzon, another island in the Philippines, bones of a different species, Homo luzonensis, revealed yet another chapter, showing that small-bodied, isolated human relatives evolved in multiple places. And in the frozen caves of Siberia, a single finger bone led to the discovery of the Denisovans, a human species we've never seen in full, yet whose DNA still lives on in modern Melanesians, Tibetans, and others. They were all part of our family, some interbred with us, others vanished into extinction. And yet, the earth remembers them in fragments. A jawbone here, a molar there, DNA trapped in the dirt, tools scattered in stone. Some species, like the Neanderthals, once occupied vast territories from Western Europe to Central Asia, thriving for hundreds of thousands of years. They were strong, intelligent, and social. They made art, wore jewelry, and survived brutal climates. And then, within a few thousand years of modern humans arriving, they were gone. Was it conflict, climate, competition, disease, or was it something quieter? The slow fading of a people outnumbered, absorbed, and outlasted. No one knows for sure. But their genes are still with us. Their legacy is not lost. It's embedded in our immune systems, our brain chemistry, even the shape of our skulls. The Denisovans, too, left no known faces, no complete skeletons. And yet their genetic influence lingers across Southeast Asia and Oceania, with unique genes that help modern Tibetans survive in high altitudes, gifted to them by a species we only learned existed a decade ago. But for every human ancestor we've named, there are others we haven't. Entire species may have lived, loved, and died without leaving behind a single fossil. The Earth preserves selectively. Most bones are eaten, crushed, dissolved, or buried beyond our reach. Our understanding of human evolution is built on fragments, a femur here, a partial skull there, and long stretches of time remain completely silent. Scientists call these periods ghost lineages, moments in evolution where we know something must have existed, but we've found nothing to prove it. Yet. That doesn't mean these humans didn't exist, only that time has hidden them well. For decades, the so-called African ape gap, a 7 million-year hole in the fossil record, left us with more questions than answers. But new finds like Nacalopithecus and Samburopithecus have begun filling in those blanks, slowly pulling lost chapters back into the light. So the story of humanity isn't just about who we are, it's about who we were and who we might have been. Perhaps a different species of human, with a slightly different brain or bone structure, might have survived instead of us. Perhaps in another version of history, the Neanderthals won, or the Denisovans built cities, or Homo floresiensis in their tiny forms developed speech and myth and fire and faith. But it was Homo sapiens, fragile, flawed, endlessly adaptable, who made it to the present. We are the last survivors of a once crowded family tree, and yet, even today, your DNA is a museum. You carry traces of the lost. You are part Neanderthal, part Denisovan, part unknown. Your body is a living fossil, one that still remembers the ancient, forgotten ones who didn't make it, and through you, in a way, they still walk the earth. Chapter 6. Reading the Code. For most of human history, your ancestors were nameless. Their stories passed down not through writing, but through genetics, scattered bones, and fading oral traditions. But in our time, the silence is breaking. With a vial of saliva and a few weeks of lab work, you can now trace your lineage back thousands of years, across deserts, oceans, and centuries of forgotten migrations. We are the first generation in history to have the power to read our past at the molecular level, through DNA. Inside every cell of your body lies a record, a genetic journal written in 4 letters, A, T, C, and G. These aren't just chemicals. They're the code of life. They carry instructions inherited from every ancestor who ever lived, from your parents and grandparents, back to the early humans who stood upright on the plains of Africa. This code is passed down generation by generation, carrying with it echoes of ancient couplings, migrations, and extinctions. And now, using tools like whole genome sequencing and ancient DNA analysis, scientists are extracting and reading that code, not only from living people, but from bones pulled from caves, glaciers, and deserts around the world. Through this genetic lens, history has started to shift. We once believed that all non-Africans descended from a single migration out of Africa 60,000 years ago. But DNA revealed multiple waves, some successful, others lost to time. We learned that nearly every non-African human alive today carries DNA from Neanderthals, and many Southeast Asians carry genes from the Denisovans, a species we only discovered thanks to a single pinky bone found in a Siberian cave. These ancient humans aren't just archaeological footnotes. They're part of us. Their DNA shapes our immune systems, our metabolism, even how we respond to altitude and disease. In the Tibetan Plateau, for example, the gene that allows people to survive in low-oxygen environments comes from Denisovan ancestors. In Europe, immune system genes from Neanderthals helped early Homo sapiens resist local pathogens. Our ancestors didn't just replace other human species, they merged with them, and their legacy continues to pulse in our blood. But the revolution doesn't stop with extinct humans. Personal genetic tests like 23andMe, Ancestry DNA, and MyHeritage have allowed millions of people to build their family trees, uncover ethnic roots, and connect with unknown relatives. Someone in New York discovers they're 40% Irish, 20% West African, and 10% Central Asian, a patchwork quilt of identity stretching across continents and centuries. A woman in Brazil finds out her great-great-grandfather came from Nigeria, likely through the transatlantic slave trade. A man in Australia discovers relatives in Poland he never knew existed, tied together by one shared strand of mitochondrial DNA, passed unchanged from mother to child for thousands of years. Mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome DNA, which trace maternal and paternal lineages, have helped scientists reconstruct ancient migration routes with staggering accuracy. By comparing genetic data across thousands of people, researchers have identified population bottlenecks, founder effects, and long-lost links between cultures that once seemed unrelated. We now know, for example, that most indigenous Americans descend from a small group that crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Siberia during the last Ice Age. But newer findings suggest multiple waves, some of which may have arrived thousands of years earlier than we once believed. Genetics has also forced historians to question long-held beliefs. Did agriculture spread from the Middle East into Europe through cultural contact, or through the migration of people? DNA shows it was both, that new populations carrying farming genes replaced and mingled with older hunter-gatherer groups. Did the Vikings settle in Ireland and leave descendants? Genetic evidence says yes, and you might be one of them. Did the British Isles receive multiple waves of migration? Not just Celts, Romans, and Saxons, but earlier peoples whose names are now lost? The answer, again, is yes. And even within Africa, the most genetically diverse continent on Earth, DNA is uncovering forgotten movements, ancient civilizations, and intermixing that defies the colonial era concept of tribes. It's telling us a new story, one that is more fluid, more mixed, and more connected than we ever imagined. But the code also humbles us. For all our differences, humans are 99.9% genetically identical. The tiny variations between us, in skin tone, hair texture, height, or eye shape, are adaptations shaped by climate and geography, not race. Race, as it turns out, is a social concept, not a biological one. Genetics doesn't care about categories. It cares about survival and the diversity that made it possible. The deeper we dig into our DNA, the clearer it becomes. We are all family. Every person alive today descends from the same small group of humans that lived in Africa tens of thousands of years ago. Go back far enough, and you'll find that you are cousins with every person on Earth. In labs around the world, the genome continues to whisper its secrets. Scientists are using ancient DNA to explore questions we never thought we could answer. When did language emerge? When did humans first wear clothing? What did extinct humans sound like? What diseases did they suffer from? The more we decode, the more we realize that humanity isn't just a species, it's a library. And inside you is a volume filled with chapters no one else has. Your DNA doesn't just connect you to your ancestors. It connects you to everyone's ancestors. And while the lines on maps still divide us, the code within us tells a different story. One of shared origins, shared struggles, and shared hope. You are not a footnote in history. You are the product of billions of years of life, billions of miles walked, and billions of choices made by people who came before you. And now, for the first time ever, you have the power to know their names, not from myths, but from science. You don't just carry your past. You can now see it, trace it, and pass it on. Because the greatest journey in human history is still unfolding, not just in fossils or firelight, but in the double helix inside your cells. And every time we read the code, we don't just discover where we came from, we remember who we've always been.